you doing? Live from the streets of Kansas City in the heart of America. Brr, it's still cold. It's 8 degrees according to the car thermometer. Of course, it doesn't help that the car is still warming up. Alright, come on, you can go. I don't know what you're waiting for, but you're stacking up the traffic on me. Today is our day to go up Broadway. There's historic Winstead's drive-in restaurant, been there since the 1930s, I believe, or 1940. A lot of places, they brag about their steak burgers, which to me all a steak burger is an expensive hamburger. But apparently it was a big thing, a sign of quality, that you would grind steaks up into burger patties instead of ground beef, which I don't know what the difference is. Steak and Shake also does that. Supposedly the original Steak and Shake in Illinois, the owner of the restaurant would go out and buy prime cuts of steak and purposely grind them into hamburgers in front of his customers so they could see exactly what was going into his burgers. And that's why the restaurants always had the kitchen kind of like where you could see it, a short order cook deal, which I guess was sort of a novelty, but I don't know if it's a novelty. Apparently, story goes that a place called White Castle chose its motif based on two things: castle being a symbol of strength, but white being a symbol of cleanliness and purity. And the idea was that you go into, and the kitchen was right there where you could see everything, and they made everybody wear white, and they had to change their uniform if it got dirty. Good luck doing that these days. But apparently back in the day, restaurants like that were known for being dirty, disgusting places. Shivering, which at least is keeping me awake. There used to be a railroad bridge that went diagonally across this intersection, and I remember pretty much the time they tore it out. And I remember when it was here, it was brought out because it narrowed the road down, it constrained the road so they could never really improve it. But it was part of the Kansas City streetcar system of the 20s, 30s, 40s. Actually, I think the streetcar system was completely gone by 1957. And I think it was the Dodson line, and there's an old stone building there in Westport that used to be the streetcar, kind of like a barn thing. people would catch their streetcar and they could go all the way to the southern limits of the city from here, which is now no longer the southern limits of the city. But you go to a little place called Dodson, which is more like a place name than a town, I think. And Dodson was the end of the line. That's the oldest part of town. And I'm noticing some long standing restaurants are now gone, probably killed by the pandemic that shall not be named. We're kind of barely hanging on before the thing hit. Now it just buried them, which is a shame. Westport was the original town, the settlement. It was called Westport because it was as far west in the United States at the time as you could be until you hit California. But California, when Westport was here, was not. Well, I have to think about that one. I'm trying to think of when the dates when Westport was started. I know Kansas City was started about 18, and the United States went to war with Mexico, and that's how we acquired the West and the Southwest, by taking it from Mexico. And this was the way you went to get to, you would come south from the river because the city leaders in Westport decided they wanted to compete with other towns along the river for the rights to be the outfitting station where you would come into town and you would give them a bunch of money and they would outfit you with a wagon and you could haul all your goods and everything. Originally southwest to Santa Fe, but eventually to Santa Fe, California, or Oregon. So all three trails came out of here. And they wanted to beat out mainly Independence, Missouri, which was probably a bigger town at the time. So they started the city settlement that they called the City of Kansas because the Kaw or Kansas River and the Missouri River met close to here, and they named it after the Kansas River, not the state of Kansas, because the state of Kansas didn't exist at the time. It was the state was, I guess, named after the river, and at the time, the state was not a state, it was a territory. It wasn't even really a territory when they founded Kansas City. Well, I guess it was. But originally it was called City of Kansas, or City of the Kansas River, or City on the Kansas River. Actually, it was mostly on the Missouri River, but... And you would arrive there by a steamboat, and then take another vehicle. Maybe you would walk if you were so poor, and come south to Westport, where you would get outfitted and head west. And of course, Westport had all the amenities, hotels, entertainment. Nowadays, it's just known for the entertainment, the beer drinking. So, not much has changed, I guess. And then the city of Kansas City eventually grew and grew and grew because its position on the river. It was a big started an industrial base. It was the first. It beat St. Joseph on building a bridge across the river, and thus St. Joseph and Kansas City sort of were competing with each other. They were both towns of about the same size. But when Kansas City got the bridge first and the railroads crossed here, then St. Joseph started kind of declining, and Kansas City became the main city on the west part of Missouri. And eventually it spread south and overtook Westport, and Westport became a neighborhood in Kansas City as opposed to Kansas City being a neighborhood in Westport. So this is not the city of Westport, this is the city of Kansas City. I often thought it would be neat if they painted murals of the trail to kind of give you the illusion. You could start it where the key, spelled Q-U-A-Y. Most people mispronounce it Quay, but it's pronounced Key. The Kansas City began, and just paint like what the trail might look like, and see if you can get some of the sides of the buildings and paint them in such a way that creates an illusion that you're on the trail heading south towards Westport. But I don't know how big that undertaking would be, or how crazy it would be. But I think it would be pretty neat, because you would kind of get the feel for the city's history, and you'd have a visual clue that you could follow this trail from the Missouri River down to Westport. Many people don't realize the American Civil War, the second Civil War, actually started here in the Missouri-Kansas border in the 1850s. When that happened, that's what alerted people to start getting ready for the big show, which was about to happen. In the election of 1860, the Democrats were divided between the candidate, Stephen Douglas, who debated Lincoln in Illinois, and I don't know who the Southern Democrat was, but essentially there were two conventions. The Southern Democrats walked out of the Northern Democrats convention and had their own. So essentially the Civil War started in the Democratic Party, where they split the northern and southern sections. The northern section, of course, choosing to remain loyal to the Union, and the southern section saying that they would rather leave the Union than have their slaves taken away. And when, of course, when they were divided that way, they gave the election to the new upstart party, which were the Republicans, under Abraham Lincoln as their candidate. And so Abraham Lincoln was elected president. And at the time, he was probably one of the most candidates going. because half the country despised. Well, they wouldn't be about half the country because there wasn't that much population in the South. That was always the South's problem. But the entire South is absolutely loathed Abraham Lincoln because he was a diehard abolitionist, they believe. But little did they know that if they had just shut up and kept their peace, he wasn't going to interfere. It's sort of like the arguments we have these days about the Second Amendment. Oh my God, if you elect a Democrat, they're going to take your guns away. And it's like, no, it's not. It hasn't happened. It won't happen. And people just get worked up about things, and eventually they get themselves in a mental spin to the point that something bad happens, usually to them. I've experienced that personally in my life, where my mind imagines things much worse than they are, and then I do things that make things a whole lot worse for me and nobody else. I guess you could tell who fought the war. I was looking at the numbers, and the Union had slightly more dead than the Confederates. Again, the Confederates didn't have a big population, but the Union was fighting an offensive war, whereas the Confederates were primarily fighting a defensive war. And in those days, the advantage was to the defenders always, because it was so much easier to defend something than to take it, because to take it you had to cross open ground against fortifications, and both sides pretty well knew what they were doing when it came to that. And it's interesting to me that the Battle of Gettysburg, the South always seemed like they were a step ahead of the North, that they were, except for not having any resources or manpower. Because, essentially the North was fighting the Confederacy with one hand tied behind his back, but the Confederates always seemed, until they went on the offensive, and then all of a sudden they became as bad an army as the Northern Army seemed to be. And then it dawns on you, the North really wasn't that bad. They were just fighting an offensive war in unfamiliar territory, which is a lot harder to do. Because when the South invaded Pennsylvania, all of a sudden they were deaf, dumb, and blind, just like the North had been all throughout up to that point. Canadian Pacific and Uncle Pete riding on Burlington Northern Santa Fe rails out of the BNSF yard. Here we are at Planes, Trains, and Automobiles over to the terminal building for the downtown airport. Downtown airport was replaced by KCI, which the call letters are MCI, but it was replaced in the early 70s by what was then very unique architectural style. And a lot of us love our airport, and they've torn one of the terminals down, and I think they're planning on doing the rest. And it's like, no, you should go back to the old plans and see what they intended to do, and I think you'd find that you'd be better off. But no, when it comes to airports, it seems like we have plenty of money to throw at them, and then they build these wonderful new modernistic terminal buildings, and it's worse than the old buildings ever were. Costs a lot of money. They're hard to get around. But the downtown airport had to be replaced because of encroachment. It's too close to downtown, of course, and they don't like having airports over urban areas, so they build them out. If you've ever noticed, most airports are built out on the outskirts. And then everybody goes, oh, business opportunities, let's develop all the land around the airport. Kansas City's airport is still so far out, they haven't done that yet, except for the hotels, motels, and light industry that's up there, some convention space. There's a house up on this hill it's a very iconic house. It's in a subdivision called Briarcliff, and this house has like 3 stories of windows looking south towards down views in the city, and I'm sure that's not a cheap house at all, but it looks to be a very pretty house. We got a fresh batch of snow yesterday, and the snow wasn't as bad as the ice that we got the day before. The day before, people couldn't hardly drive around. Yesterday, it snowed. It seemed like it was snowing pretty intensely, but it wasn't very heavy snow. And for the most part, the roads were okay. But now they're still doing this thing where everybody's going, oh, we're using our alternate bus stops and things like that, and we're like, why? The roads are fine now. Yesterday you should have been using alternate bus stops. I had to take the kids into school. Let's see, was that yesterday? Yeah. No, I didn't do that yesterday because the kids were off. They called school. Actually, they didn't call school. Nowadays, they don't call school. They just say, we're going virtual today. Which is bad because our kids have lost their iPad privileges. This is the U.S. highway that replaced the Jefferson Highway, which was an auto trail route that went from Winnipeg, Canada to New Orleans, Louisiana, Pine to Palm. road you can still travel on. It's east of here, about a mile or so. And you can follow the old road pretty much all the way up. There are a lot of places where it's kind of gotten buried by the U.S. routes that replaced it. And eventually the interstate that replaced all of it, or supplanted it, was I-35. But it doesn't exactly follow the old Jefferson Highway route. What's going on? Maybe I spoke too soon about the roads being good. Well, that it's all police cars and a paddy wagon surrounding a minivan. I'm guessing that the minivan is either stolen plates, or the person was carrying something in the minivan that they shouldn't have been. Which is hard to imagine a minivan being used for nefarious purposes. Although I don't know why, because minivans as a vehicle are probably some of the best designed vehicles on the road. They maximize space, and even though most of them don't get very good mileage because they're loaded, they're really heavy with stuff, features and everything. Minivans are a very efficient design. Certainly very comfortable when you have kids and dogs, and everybody can get in and they have their space. And I prefer them over. I've had a pickup truck, and I actually prefer minivans over that, because in a compact size you have a way of hauling things around. Now, I'd still like to have a pickup truck again, because there's certain things you can haul that you need a pickup truck for, but I don't do that much of that kind of hauling, so the pickup truck kind of goes to waste with me for now. I can see this road still has some icy patches. It hasn't been treated very much. The school buses have a hard time with this hill. They get right up here and then they realize that it's too icy. And yesterday the bus stopped about in the middle here and couldn't move anywhere. The day before, the ditch on that side. And I think, they just need to let them know that if they come in the other way in the neighborhood, they probably have a better go at it. And if they could somehow turn around and not take this hill, because this hill is a bear to get down. But there's another equally great hill on the other side, so you really can't win on that one. It's what happens when you put a neighborhood on top of a hill. Well, anyway, I'm almost there, so I'm gonna hang this up. So,